This session is titled Innovating Now for the Future, Energy, Industry, Policy, and Decarbonization for the Arctic Region. We'll have panelists from the Department of Energy, from the Harvard Kennedy School, from the Alaska Renewables, from Total Energies, and from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And so I think, as we set the stage looking at resource opportunities in the North, this discussion led by Isaac and the panelists that will join me on stage is, I think, particularly timing as we look towards the future of the North. So please join me in welcoming Isaac to the stage.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Jackson and Rachel and Emily and the crew over at Arctic Encounters for this great event that they've pulled together. It's gotten bigger and better every year. I'm pleased that it's now here in Anchorage, and it's a real kind of asset to the community, and it is adding a lot to the conversation, these important conversations that we're all having. So thanks to the Arctic Encounter team. And we have a wonderful panel here in front of me. I take some pride in the fact that they had to bring up 2 extra chairs for this panel. So we've got a lot to go through here. I think just to identify folks, from left to right here, we have Dr. Jerry Richmond, Undersecretary of Science and Innovation with the Department of Energy. We have, next to her is Ms. Kira O'Brien, the Public Policy Representative with Total Energies. Next to Kira, we have Gwen Holdman, Associate Vice Chancellor, Research and Innovation and Industry Partnerships for the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Next to Gwen is Jennifer Spence, Senior Fellow of the Arctic Initiative, Harvard Kennedy School, based out of Boston and focused on Canada. And next to her is Mr. Matt Perkins, CEO of Alaska Renewables. And I am Isaac Vandenberg, CEO of Launch Alaska. So the topic of today is innovating now for the future. Energy, industry, policy, and decarbonization for the Arctic region. I had to look at my paper here to get the full title. It's quite a mouthful. And what I think is interesting about this panel is that there's a lot to it, and I think that's reflective of the truth. What we're trying to do with innovation, you can't just look at one slice of this. You can't just look at the startups or the policy or the corporates or the project development side. You kind of have to look at the whole if we're actually going to make progress as a region. And so it's great that we have such an eclectic bunch here to share their voices on this topic. I would also say that one thing that I hope that we can talk about here as a panel is, there's this notion of Alaska as a world-class deployment ground for the technologies of the future. And what I think this means is that, Alaska is this place where, thanks to our climatic conditions and our geography and our communities, we're a place where folks can come and partner with communities and partner with Alaskans and can, deploy technology and kind of engage in a process of kind of co-creation and co-innovation. And Alaska has all these wonderful assets to make that happen. And yet, we also have some huge challenges, which I think we're going to talk about here today. To kind of tee us off here, if you don't mind, starting with Dr. Richmond here, given your kind of national perspective and your, you work in states across the country and looking at a very high level across the country. I'm curious how you come to this conversation and, if you can share your thoughts and give us a little bit of framing of this conversation from a national perspective.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Isaac, and thank everyone for letting me be part of this discussion this afternoon. I'm just going to share a few of my reflections, but first let me say how great it is to be back in Alaska. I was here a year ago, and I had the opportunity to go to Noatek, Kotzebue, Shugnak, and also see the research facilities at Utuvik. And so and I also have to say that even though I'm in this job in DC, I've spent the last 35 years in Oregon, so I feel a lot of strong ties to Alaska, particularly since every Thanksgiving I go to watch the salmon spawn on a rural creek where we have a cabin, so it's always special. I consider this a very special place, and I also consider this a very innovative space. So I want to say that a really good connection for all of you to the Department of Energy is Dr. Eric Whitney, who is here in the front seat here. She's director. She made her put her hand up. She is the director of our Arctic Energy Office, and she's new to this position, but boy, is she well connected to everybody. So please connect with her because she can give you a lot of information on how to make sure that Alaska is included in everything that we're talking about in Washington. So just to give you kind of a background, I'm a scientist. I'm a combination of chemist and physicist for the last 45 years. And I currently oversee in the Department of Energy all of the funding for our basic science in basic energy sciences as well as computer science, high energy physics, nuclear physics, fusion energy, computational science, and also our environmental sciences. All of this is the fundamental science. And on the other side, I oversee everything having to do with the Applied Energy Office, which is also critical minerals, which we've talked about, fossil energy and carbon management, the nuclear energy side, which is the applied side, and energy and renewable applications also. So all the things you're talking about today, I intimately love, and they are in my portfolio. But I also want to make you aware of a lot of the things that we're doing up in Alaska are driven by a number of the 14 national laboratories that I oversee. I know that NREL is certainly here, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and I also know Sandia is here today too. So I want to say that they are really important in working with all of you through the Department of Energy in what we are doing in all the renewable issues, the decarbonization, and so forth. So we are here I am here to listen again, to make sure that I understand the issues in sort of my second go-around. So please feel free to contact me beyond this time. But Isaac, I'm going to stop there and then turn it over to you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Richmond. Gwen, if I can put you on this spot next here. Yeah, Gwen, you and ASAP and the university and Center ICE are doing a lot of work in innovation in the state. And I know that you've spent a lot of time over the years looking at Iceland and their approach to, kind of developing an innovation community within their population of, 300,000 or so. I'm curious, can you also help us share your view on what's exciting? What are some of the exciting technologies, innovations, things that are going well in Alaska from an innovation perspective, and how we kind of fit into the kind of broader Arctic, innovation ecosystem? Oh, there's a little. Just flip that switch.
Got it. All right. Thanks, Isaac. Yeah, I appreciate that. And, I have had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in Iceland as a Arctic Fulbright Fellow, working with them across a number of different technologies. I actually got my start. I'm a mechanical engineer and a physicist by training, working on the Chena Hot Springs geothermal power plant, and that really brought me to Iceland and this kind of connection with what's happening there. But one of the things that I really like about Iceland is that they're using affordable energy there that's based on their local resources that they have available to really drive local economic development. And a lot of that's around sort of these innovative, different small businesses or processes that kind of feed into this, broader global kind of economy or this challenge that we're trying to solve around energy transitions. And so that does make me think a lot about, like, here in Alaska, what are some of the unique opportunities, or what are some of the expertise, or what are we doing well, right? A lot of times we think about what we could be doing better, or what we need to do in the future, but there's also some things that we should recognize that we're doing well here. And one of those is really around these ideas of distributed, isolated microgrid systems and an integration of high contribution renewables on those kinds of grids. We have been doing microgrids way before microgrids were cool. There's a lot of belief that one of the ways that we're moving in terms of our energy supply and generation is toward more distributed models, more decentralized models. And there's no place in the United States that's more naturally decentralized than Alaska is. And so this is something that we've been working on for a really long time. And we have places here in Alaska that are able now to turn off the diesel generator and run off of 100% renewables using local resources. You mentioned Shungnak. Shungnak is a really innovative project. It's solar diesel. And the innovation doesn't just extend to the technological solutions. It also extends to some of the business models that we're using, because in that case, the renewable energy system is a tribally owned project. And so there's actually a handshake, there's an agreement with the utility where the utility hands over generation of power for that community when there's available solar energy to the tribe. And I don't know of any utilities in the United States that are willingly transferring all responsibility for power generation at some period of time to a third party. That's a local entity. And so there's some really cool innovations in how we're doing things in Alaska. And I think that's something that I view this very much as a two-way street. There are things that we need to learn, there's things that we can improve or at a critical juncture in terms of our future energy decisions here in Alaska today. But there's also some things that we're doing where we have the opportunity to say, hey, we're doing some things pretty well. You know, a lot of these high contribution renewable projects in rural Alaska is all about distributed load management. So we're overproducing with something like wind, and then we're using dispatchable loads, usually thermal loads. And that's really cool, the way that we're doing that. And I think there's opportunities to learn and look at what Alaska's doing to see the applications for other markets as well.
Great, thank you, Gwen. And I would just add, I'm going a little bit out of order here, but for folks who want to ask questions, or you want to start jotting down your questions for afterwards, there is a sidebar menu on the app that will refer to the main stage. Just go through there and start typing in your questions so that we have some for the end here. So following up on something that Gwen mentioned, which is this idea that Alaska is a leader in distributed energy systems and microgrids. I think something that's really interesting to see is that a lot of these projects that we've done in Alaska have a variety of players involved. It's the university, it's a project developer, it's a local community, Village Corp. There's a long laundry list of partners and folks involved to get some of these projects done. I'm curious, maybe asking you, Jennifer, if you can help us understand, maybe in a place like Canada or in other parts of the world, how they approach the development of an ecosystem to get projects done, and how you kind of structure these public-private university partnerships, and if there's anything we can learn from other places, or what can we learn from other places, I guess I should say.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think the thing to keep in mind is innovation is a means to an end. So ultimately, we need to start asking questions about, in the Arctic context, what is the end we're trying to achieve? And I think some of current events really drive or pull out some of what those core reasons are that we're trying to innovate. I mean, we see the need for better energy security. We see the need for more reliability and sovereignty, the ability for communities to make their own decisions, and then the question of sustainability. And part of that is learning from different communities who've had these experiences. And so the example of Iceland is an excellent one. And there is that opportunity for these sort of multidisciplinary groups, so communities sort of driving an agenda of what they need in their context, but working with the private sector, working with investors, working with the public sector to really sort of define what that looks like. And so, I mean, I use the example of the Arctic Council Sustainable Development Working Group, and recognizing that you need a whole suite of initiatives. So you need the capacity development. I mean, ultimately, communities have to be able to deliver on these things, and they need to be sustainable from that perspective. But you also need the tools, and you need the technology, and you need the policy environment. And so, how do you bring all those pieces together is by sharing that experience across different environments. So Canada and the US have very similar kind of circumstances. You compare that with Greenland, I would say that's common again. And then you have a very different context in the Nordics. So making some of the sort of what are some of the common elements that you can look at, and what are some of the differences, and how do you learn from each other. So.
Great. There's it's a kind of very strong, thriving conversation that's happening, I feel like, in almost every session at this conference, but certainly all around us, which is, this moment that we're in Alaska with some real economic headwinds, the need to think through some of the gas, supply issues on the rail belt, And also just, as a state, thinking about what our energy future looks like. And a lot of these conversations are swirling around that just kind of general theme. One thing that I think everyone assumes is that at some point this transition will happen, whether it's in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, that we are making this transition as a state. And for that to happen, under most scenarios, we need to have kind of rapid deployment of renewables of all sorts, distributed on people's rooftops and in small microgrids, as well as, probably some large-scale, gigawatt-scale type of developments. And so I'm curious, our two kind of resident project developers in the room, Kira and Matt, and maybe starting with you, Kira. I know you're on the policy side of Total Energy. But as you look at Alaska, are there things about our policy landscape that are great or could use some improving? Or can you give us some tough love in terms of how we're doing from a policy perspective for potential renewable project developers?
Yeah, absolutely. Just wanted to say thank you really quickly for having me here today. I was born and raised in Ketchikan, so it's always a joy to get back to Alaska to talk about our energy future. I think when we talk about project development, we need to split it into two categories. We have the innovative side, which can be the deployment of technologies that are not yet market scale, and then you have the market scale project development. I think Alaska presents an incredible opportunity as it currently stands for those innovative projects, for pilots, for other technologies in a demo kind of phase. What's not quite there yet from a state policy standpoint is the market deployment, particularly for technologies that are market scale but are still up and coming. And I think the largest piece that I can speak to on that when we're evaluating a market is there a form of procurement for renewable power? That can look like a renewable portfolio standard. It can look like other things. But is there a path to market, basically, for a market scale renewable source? The innovation side is a lot simpler, I would say, not to discount that by any standard. When we're looking at projects in the lower 48, we have folks come to us from other states and say, we'd love to do a demo, we have wave energy or things like that. And we just say, your regulatory environment is not compatible with this, whereas Alaska's openness to new ideas is a highly attractive market for something like that.
Interesting. And so anything to add there, Matt? I know your firm focuses on all sorts of renewables, currently maybe more focused on wind and storage. Anything to add that you're finding through your efforts to get projects unstuck or projects developed here in Alaska?
Yeah, I would, well, first of all, I'm going to avoid the question for a second and just say I've been on a number of panels, and I've been in the energy industry a couple more years than it looks, and I've never been on a panel with an awesome male-to-female ratio in the energy industry like this one. So I just want to commend the organizers and these women leaders. So I don't have that much to say, and it's an honor to be here. But yeah, I mean, specific to that point, procurement and partnership with outside capital to deploy on, now mature technologies and to collaboratively get into the details of the grid transition here in Alaska is a new frontier for the rail belt utilities, I would say. And they've innovated for years. Golden Valley did the world's largest BESS in 2003 and certainly worked with outside partners there. But I do agree that this is a new moment, and it's an overwhelming moment for all of us, including business players like us who seek to follow the lead of the community and the market. We have a 1 gigawatt pipeline of wind and the energy storage required to make that happen here in Alaska. But it's bewildering, and so it puts a lot of pressure. And I think in that context, you need to be super sensitive to the history and be a student of today's market. And I think the policy opportunities are super exciting, but the more of a level playing field and open mind that they can encourage in terms of what are our goals as a state, and by what year do we want to achieve milestone outcomes rather than picking the winners? Those would be my thoughts on policy direction.
Yeah, great. But the other part of this we haven't really touched on yet, but I appreciated Jennifer's comments earlier about we don't innovate for innovation's sake. We don't plan for planning's sake. We plan because we're trying to drive certain outcomes, for humans, ideally. and yet, I think one of the issues that we're all looking at within this ecosystem in the Arctic is the issue of talent. How do we attract, develop, retain talent? Curious, and this is to no one in particular, but curious if any of you can share best practices, exciting innovations of their own right, things that folks are doing in other parts of the world to ensure that there's talent available for this. And I saw Jennifer's hand go up first. So I'm going to go to her, and then you next, Kira.
Well, I look to Gwen as I say this as well, as a part of this is about supporting local talent, right? And so mentoring programs like through the Arctic Renewable Energy Network Academy that give people the opportunity to demonstrate, but also to mentor and bring back to their own communities the right kinds of solutions. I think those types of things, and that way the capacity lives in the community. And because a lot of the challenges right now are, you bring in these types of innovative new approaches, and there isn't necessarily the sustained human capacity to support them. And so it's the management of them that becomes a problem. So it's not just picking the right solution, but then also ensuring that human capacity exists. And so programs like ARENA are a really important example of that. So Gwen, I tip my hat.
Just to add on to that briefly, I think that there's an important point that needs to be reiterated again and again, is that energy projects are community projects, and so that local talent can be developed within the community. One example that we have from our work in the U.S. is our New York Bight offshore wind project. We've committed $10 million to create a renewable energy training program with the City College of New York, as part of our bid to sell power to the state of New York. So in some sort of program that the state is running that encourages renewable power development, you can also encourage those localized training programs that are developing your workforce of the future.
Dr. Richmond, did you have anything to share about how DOE is thinking about ensuring that there's talent available for this energy transition that we're trying to make nationally?
Well, I'd love hearing your examples too. We certainly are. It's a big deal for us, and in fact, we are pushing even harder in trying to recruit more students into this area. And boy, it doesn't take the hard recruiting that I'm used to having to recruit somebody hard to go into just physics or chemistry or computer science. I mean, you're going to save the planet, if you come do this. And so we have a number of different projects in the Office of Science. They're giving fellowships away for our energy frontier research centers. And I have to tell you, so I'm thinking about graduate students here, but also community college students. If we really want to get a diverse population of students that are working in this area, we have to be able to pay them stipends, graduate stipends in particular, that they can live on, because we know that many of our underrepresented groups just can't afford to go to graduate school making what we currently have now is $35K sort of a year. And so if we're serious about the talent, to get the talent in there, and particularly in the energy area, which we are so committed to, then we're now offering our fellowships at up to $45K a year. And so this is a good, important step, and we are the only agency to lead that, because we recognize that we need this workforce. And also all the mentoring programs that you're talking about, I think it's really important that all of our institutions, and I've seen this also in Alaska, your universities are working hard in order to get students into this workforce. But again, we've got the momentum behind us because you're going to help us save the planet. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Gwen, Jennifer referred to the ARENA program there briefly.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit of what the university is doing in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is one example. I mean, this is really, it's a spectrum, right? And so this Arctic Remote Energy Network Academy actually borrows from a program that was developed in Iceland around a geothermal training program. And so that was the idea that, you invest a lot of time and money and resources into individuals that are in the best position to potentially move individual projects forward, whether that's globally looking at geothermal. I think that this Iceland program has probably had there's only 750 fellows that have participated in it since the late 1970s, but it has probably impacted about a third of the global geothermal development. That's my estimate. For us here in Alaska, we have people that are in very remote places, Greenland, northern Canada and other places where you're grappling with these challenges around local energy development, and people feel isolated and they don't have the right resources. They don't know who to connect with to get good answers. And so those kinds of programs really help people that are practitioners at the ground level to make sure that they're taking advantage of the lessons learned in other places and the resources that are available. But at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, I actually joined the university from industry, from private sector, because I deeply believe that our universities are a critical institution, both for being centers of innovation and for being a grounding resource for innovation in markets, and also because of this need to really educate the next generation. And so one of the things, for example, that we're doing at the University of Alaska Fairbanks is we're really thinking about rethinking how we do our education programs around energy, around engineering, and really reinvent that around energy resource engineering, and rethinking, not making this so stovepiped. And so, I really appreciate the Department of Energy really putting these different programs, whether it's fossil fuel based or nuclear or renewables, sort of in similar sorts of arenas, and so we're not so stovepiped about the way we think about it. And so from the University of Alaska Fairbanks perspective, we no longer want to be stovepiped about thinking about petroleum engineering very separate from renewables. It's a spectrum. We believe people should have the opportunity to be educated in all of the above solutions, because then we can make better decisions for our future as a state, as our communities. And so at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, we're really trying to think through how we're educating that next generation and how we can keep Alaskans here or bring Alaskans back to the state to be really part of that future. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. Certainly from my experience, we have a lot of companies in our portfolio who are coming here, and they're excited about some of the opportunities in Alaska and, partnering with Alaska communities. And frankly, many of them would like to grow their firms here and like to have a headquarter, and the talent thing really matters. And really it's at all stages. It's are there schools for the kids with within the startups, families to go to? Are there employees for their firms today? So a hugely important issue. I also think it's interesting that Kira, you had mentioned some investments directly that Total Energies is making, and I'm curious. We often think about talent development from purely a public or university perspective. Can you share a couple of thoughts on what you think industry can do to help with the talent development pipeline?
Sure, absolutely. We see it as an imperative as a developer. These workforces that we're creating today, they'll be ready tomorrow, but we need talent today. And so we're trying to do the groundwork now. In offshore wind, which is my primary focus, we're going to need a maritime workforce that's US-based that far exceeds what our current capacity is. And we can't just keep bringing in that talent from Europe. And so localizing that is a crucial part of our project development model. And I think, like you were saying, the differentiation between traditional petroleum engineering and renewable energy, the lines are blurring incredibly. I work with colleagues all the time at my company that have a background in petroleum engineering. They have entire careers, 30 years long, in resource extraction, and now they're building renewable projects. And I think that's an absolutely crucial piece of the puzzle as a part of this transition.
They're so good for geothermal too, right?
Absolutely.
I know how to dig holes deep, right?
Certainly.
We are now, I think, starting our Q&A part of the session here. At least I think that's what the timer is telling me here. And oh, good, it worked. Several of you sent in some questions for the group here. So off the top here, maybe coming back to you, Gwen, what do you think about the potential of nuclear microreactors for rural Alaska and other rural locations in the Arctic region? Have you ever looked into rural nuclear, micronuclear, Gwen?
So it's kind of like a personal joke in our program at the Alaska Center for Energy and Power. I've wound up becoming like the nuclear person in the state of Alaska, very much by accident. It wasn't really my intention, but I guess geothermal was a little bit my entry point because I know about thermal systems. I've got a physics background. I've been very interested in microreactors for about 14 years and really been watching the technology evolve across that time frame. And I believe that these advanced reactors that are quite different from legacy reactors that a lot of us think of, initially when we think about nuclear energy, have a real potential application for the future in some parts of Alaska, right? It's not one of those, there's one solution fits all, but I do think that the idea of having these small nuclear batteries, essentially, that provide a heat source, heat is obviously a very important commodity in the Arctic, and that there really could be some potential applications for this in certain places in Alaska. Do I eventually think that they might, be broadly applicable? That's hard to say, right? I think that we're still pretty early during this technology evolution, and one of the challenges that I think we see here in Alaska is that we are, we're sort of in this space where we have two places that we can be in this technology evolution, like early adoption space. We can either be an early adopter, right? There's interest in seeing technologies like microreactors potentially deployed in Alaska. The first commercial microreactor right now is scheduled to be deployed at Eielson Air Force Base in 2027. I'm actually expecting that timeline might slip. But there's an opportunity space where Alaska could say, yeah, this is a technology that we think has application here, whether that's in certain places in rural Alaska or whether that's actually on a rail belt as well. I actually think it could be interesting in conjunction with some of these heating applications like downtown Fairbanks and things like that in the future. But I mean, at the end of the day, we're at this place where we could be part of that early adoption, or else I think by default we wind up being a later adopter, because everyone wants serial number 15 for microreactors. Nobody wants number 1, 2, or 3. Hopefully those will go to more military bases. But at the end of the day, we're not going to be competitive for number 15 through 100, right? Then we're saying we're going to be a later adopter, and we can't make decisions around that. So that's one thing, as we're seeing these emerging technologies, we need to think about. We have an opportunity to be at the front end, or else we kind of by default end up a little bit further down the line. And that's what we're seeing with energy storage right now with lithium-ion batteries. The cost that we're seeing for potential battery solutions, you mentioned the BESS that Golden Valley installed. We were at the leading edge of battery energy storage technology, but now we're seeing premiums that we need to pay because there's so much demand, right? And so Alaska has to be pretty pragmatic about the decisions that we're making and where we want to be strategic and where we just want to be kind of take a more passive approach. And I think nuclear is an area where we have an opportunity to either be strategic or passive, and I'm not the decision maker in that. That's something that we have to decide as a state.
Great. Any other opinions or any comments to add from the panel on that topic? I saw, Matt, you nodding your head, so you must think that there's some role for renewables to complement nuclear. Maybe it's not an either-or thing in terms of nuclear or renewables.
No, I mean, I think it's all about what's the problem we're trying to solve. And, I'll actually comment on the question around attracting talent to Alaska, because the state is a terrific place and has the ingredients. And when you talk about clean energy, this is a place where we should be able to attract talent. But there are two other impediments that I didn't hear really focused on. One is the cost of living. And so our explicit goal is to lower the cost of power for the state of Alaska. And that's a meaningful amount of people's monthly budgets, both for heating and for electricity. So that's one important part of attracting talent. And then secondly is really providing the housing. Our projects will employ 300 workers at peak construction, and these are close to cities, and yet that's housing that's not available. And so I attended the housing workshop earlier, and this is sort of a critical challenge. So I think we really try to think about the block and tackle of what can be deployed in the next 2 to 3 years and what's required to get there. And I am, Gwen has been encouraging me to take a fresh look at nuclear, and so I am. But we need to be able to, buy it, install it, finance it, and safely operate it. And I don't have any reservations about the technical pathway to get there. It's just, a timeline for us and what our goals are. What's the problem we're trying to solve?
Great, thanks, Matt. And we have one last question here. How receptive are Alaskan industries to incorporating renewable blended energy sources in their processes? both in rural and in urban settings in Alaska. Does anyone want to take a swing at that, Dr. Richmond?
Well, I would say, first of all, let's not ignore the fact that we have these IRA and Bill. And this is really to incentivize companies everywhere, including Alaska, to really invest in their communities in this changeover from to the green revolution. And we're already receiving hundreds of proposals from around the country for this money. We want to make sure that we get a lot of them from Alaska, because we already, for example, with the Biden administration, we already have 100 new companies working on batteries. Let's make sure that some of those companies are here also. But also the fact that Bill and IRA are really going to help catalyze a lot of the industry that would be scared otherwise. And in fact, many of the projects that we're doing at the Department of Energy are the demonstration projects that then we do them, and that de-risks companies to come in and take them over. And you can certainly put that in the nuclear category too. So I just have to put the plug in for people to pay attention to these, because even it's going to help you with home insulation. It's going to help you with solar panels. It's going to, these tax incentives are just amazing for your home in addition to companies.
Great.
Well, we submitted one of those DOE applications with the utility powering this room, so take a look at that. We haven't heard back yet.
Business being conducted in real time here, folks. Well, Dr. Richmond, Kira, Gwen, Jennifer, and Matt, thank you so much for your time and for everything you do. And I think that we'll call the panel here.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.